Okay, so it's pretty cold and cloudy and getting dark, but I wanted to come out here and do a quick flight with the CineApe 35, since I'm going to try and do a little more in-depth review on the setup and everything of it. But just wanted to give a quick fly around the park here before it's too dark. And I might test the return to home feature if I can feel comfortable with all these trees around. Not so sure about that, but yeah. Anyway, nothing special. Okay, so the return to home looks pretty well. Oh, and that's cool. You can actually Okay, so that flight is finally over. For those that sat through all 5 minutes of that, you're more patient than I am, but watching me boringly fly around in the near dark, but I just mainly wanted to get out and really testing the GPS return home, or what do they call it? The rescue feature. That's what Betaflight calls it. Seemed to work pretty good. It kind of has that weird herky-jerky, movement on the return, but it made it. I may have to make some adjustments in the settings, but it made it. And one cool feature I noticed right as I was about to land is that you can actually make like minor corrections to the flight path while it's in the return to home. So yeah, it definitely worked. I mean, it's not the same as like a DJI or something like that, but I think it'll save your bird if you get into trouble. So beyond that, I mean, overall, this is just coming from someone who's fairly new to these FPV quads. This CineApe 35, it seems to be fly pretty stable. I'd say it's a good beginner craft. It's it's very stable. It's not too squirrely feeling or anything. It's not too fast. Even in acro mode, it's yeah. Well, anyway, the main thing I was going to do here at the end was plug in. As you can see, I have Betaflight up. I was going to plug into it and just kind of give a quick rundown of a few things I learned during my setup of the quad here. So first off, my recommendation would be to just connect with the existing firmware that's on and the existing settings from the factory. I found them to be pretty good overall. I made a couple little tweaks, primarily on my rates, just because they were set super high. They were set to like, where was it? Pit tuning. The rates were set like crazy high. They were like 800 or something like that. So I dropped them down just because I like to have a little more dampened feeling. But other than that, I mean, really, I'm still kind of learning PID rates and all of that, and I'm not, real good at that. I'm still kind of figuring it out, but I left most of it the way it was from the factory. So, like I say, I would personally recommend just going through and setting things up how you like it. Everything comes from the factory pretty good. All the GPS is all set up, the VTX is all set up, which I do have a comment on that I'll get to at the end. That may or may not be a problem if you have one of these. So I'm trying to double check here. Anything that I changed from the factory that I personally found better? Oh yeah, the camera angle was set pretty high. I mean, personally, I'm liking, because I'm not flying super fast yet, I'm dropping the camera angle down a little bit. But other than that, I believe all this was already checked and seemed like a good idea to leave as it were. The failsafe is a big one. So once again, they had it pretty well set from the factory. You have to, of course, go in and assign a switch to the GPS rescue. And everything else, though, like the stage 2, you go from stage 1 to stage 2 if you lose signal, and then these were all about what it was set to where it goes into the either whichever mode you choose, which this was already selected. And it's pretty self-explanatory. You got fixed altitude, current altitude, which means it'll return at the current altitude. Fixed means it'll rise to whatever altitude you set it for, right here, which of course is in meters for those of us here in the States. we got to deal with that. And then maximum altitude means it will go to whatever the highest altitude you got to in the flight. So I just stuck with fixed. Let's see, I bumped the ascent rate up just a little bit, and the ground speed, I bumped that up a little bit from 5. I think those are both at 5. I bumped those up a little bit. Pitch angle was slightly less than this, I believe. No, I think it was about 35. The descent rate, I originally was thinking of bumping that up, but as I seen how it returned, I'm pretty happy with the way it was. I don't really want it to slam into the ground any faster than that. And all this other stuff, the throttle, apparently this is an important one. The hover throttle, I set that. Oh no, I didn't change that at all. Yeah, these ones are all stayed the same. Minimum distance to home. They give you, a range. I think it's like, it doesn't say here. The configuration files, it said, I think it's like, I think 30 was the minimum actually. So, okay, and one other thing I just remembered is this allow arming without fix. That was checked from the factory. I went ahead and unchecked that because that's, after reading about it, it seems like not a terribly good thing to have, because if you do get a real fail safe, it's just going to drop with that checked. It does allow you to fly faster, so I mean, I don't know. I may change that eventually. We'll see. So, moving on, like I say, I already kind of touched on the tuning. It seemed pretty good from the factory, so I didn't mess with it. Maybe once I get a little better, I'll actually care. But so anyway, receiver. This is an important one. I was concerned with the SPI receiver being a pain, like a lot of people talk about, but it actually ended up being super simple to deal with. It literally just it populates as SPI, populates as ELRS on the receiver type. You just enter your binding phrase, whatever matches with your transmitter, which, as far as I could tell, this was the 3.0 version of ELRS, because that's what my transmitter is set to, and it bound right up, didn't give it any issues at all. So everything else is standard configuration here on the channel mapping, and yeah, it's real straightforward. All you do is enter your binding phrase pretty much, go down, hit bind receiver, save and reboot afterwards, and it should be good to go. And then modes, like any other version of Betaflight that you'll run into, you got to set an arm switch. I ended up, in fact, I got to redo this because it wasn't right. I got to mess with these because I thought on my other CineApe, I mentioned where I had the situation where I bumped the arm switch, dropped it. I ended up setting a second switch. I did that on this one, but for some reason it didn't work. I put it as and aux1 and aux4, and that worked for the other quad. But this one, for some reason, when I was flying today, it didn't work at all. Like, I could only push one button. That was it. So I'm going to mess with that a little bit. But basically, there is a way to get to where you have to push both switches to get it to arm or disarm. So I found that kind of handy. You may or may not want that or care about that. I don't know. It probably depends on your transmitter and how easy it is to bump. But other than that, I set up angle, and I did set up horizon mode, although I'm like a lot of people, I'm not real fond of that. I'm trying to, use acro mode as much as possible. And I'm getting better at that. So, and then you have to assign your GPS rescue, and of course all this stuff's populated, but you go ahead and assign that. I put mine at the very end, so it's the last end of the 3-position switch that I hit, so you don't accidentally hit it as easily. And then just my beeper, and that's it. There's of course all these other ones they populate, but I haven't really messed with that yet. And then under GPS, mostly this is not really much point to this, except I did make sure to check that set home point once, because so basically what that does is it doesn't reset your home point every time you arm, because otherwise, if you get out a ways or something and have, you drop or you disarm or whatever, and then you want to rearm, it's going to set your home point to that location. So I figured it was safer than sorry just to do this. Other than that, yeah, we got OSD. And of course, you can configure that, just typical Betaflight. You can configure that however you want. I particularly wanted to, get my altitude, distance from home, and all that. Show my GPS coordinates, because that can be very handy if you lose it. It drops down somewhere far away. You can at least have your coordinates, hopefully. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about was the video transmitter. So this one, I'm actually communicating right now with the people at Darwin FPV, because the VTX I got is actually not the one that's supposed to be in it. They advertise, it's like they advertise that it's a 1 watt VTX and all this. And when I got this, it was like you couldn't select anything but 25 milliwatts, 200 milliwatts, or 600. And I was messing around with this for a while, and I finally figured out that they, I started looking at their website, and they had this one particular VTX listed, the 5804, I believe it was, 1 watt. And what I actually have in this is a TX805P, which is supposedly a max of 800 milliwatts. So I don't know if they intentionally are swapping these out, or if they just screwed up, because they do look almost identical. But food for thought. That is something that you could end up with, and it's kind of a pain then, because it's hard to configure, because their VTX tables don't match, because they want to see 200, 800, and 1 watt, and it's just not jiving. I mean, the VTX is still working, and it seems to be putting out pretty good power. I don't have a watt meter to test it with, but it seems to be putting out okay power for now. But it would be nice to get it actually calibrated correctly. So trying to think of anything else. This pretty cool feature here, the low power disarm, for any of you new guys that haven't done this before. It actually automatically powers on at the lowest power setting, see, until first arm, which basically lets your VTX not overheat while it's sitting there and getting GPS signals acquired. So anyway, that is pretty much it. The one other little thing I was going to touch on, first off, you want to get, once you get this all set, my recommendation is go ahead and do a file dump from your configuration CLI center here, and you get the dump, and then that has all your configurations and everything, and then you'll take those, save them, which when you're doing the firmware update, it prompts you to do all that, of course. I'm not going to do a firmware update right now because of a little coinky dink I found, I guess you could say. Oops. So basically, you can't have your GPS plugged in when you do the firmware update. It will not recognize it. It's something to do with the serial port. It sees too many serial ports, and it doesn't think it can do the firmware update. The other ones I've had, other quads I have, the other two I had no problem. But so see, like I'm plugged in right now. This is my normal plug into the flight controller here. The Betaflight, the STM32 F411. Connect to that fine. So when you're ready to do your firmware update, you'll go to activate bootloader here. You have to have the expert mode enabled right here on the setup screen. You go to activate bootloader. There is no bootloader button
on the flight controller. It's like an all-in-one unit, and it's covered in rubber or whatever, some kind of waterproofing thing, and there's no way to boot it any other way into the DFU mode. So you do that, but you'll see up here this just doesn't change. And that's because I have the GPS plugged in right now. Once you unplug the GPS, it'll come up and it'll look like the other one. It'll say, you know, STM32 F411 DFU bootloader. I think that was what it said. It's something to that effect. But basically it says DFU bootloader, so you know that's when you're ready to do your firmware update. I mean, I can kind of run through it anyway and show you what it looks like. But, oh wait, see, I already screwed myself up. Now I gotta unplug it, plug it back in. And I'll just kind of do a fake. Come on. Okay, I'll do a fake update firmware. And then it's pretty simple. Like in the case of this one, you'll want no reboot sequence and full chip erase, especially the full chip erase, because you're completely, you know, restarting. It's pretty easy on this one. You'll go to Darwin F4SX 1280 HD, and it looks like it automatically loads the best one. I actually did this for real the other day, and like I say, it has to be in the bootloader mode. And then you just want to double check everything, make sure your radio protocol is good, make sure, like, you know, all your options are checked that you need, and it should populate it the way it, you know, correctly needs to be in the first place. So then you'll go down, you'll go to load firmware online, and it'll load, and then you'll hit flash firmware, and what should happen, and it'll tell you this is what I mentioned a minute ago. It'll say flashing new firmware will wipe out all your settings. We strongly recommend to save a backup before continuing. And then when you go to create backup, well, yeah, this one's saying unknown because I'm not in bootloader mode, I think is why. But what'll happen is it'll actually have the name of your, you know, whatever the name of it'll say CineApe 35 CLI backup. And that's what's back. Well, yeah, you can see right there, actually. That's the one I actually did. And that's, you know, backing up all your custom settings, or the ones that came from the factory that, you know, like in my case, I modified. So I would save that. And then as soon as I save that, it would pop up another window saying, okay, are you ready to, you know, flash your firmware? And you click flash firmware, and that's it. In this case, it's just not recognizing it. So anyway, that was one of the big ones I definitely wanted to touch on, though, that you have to have your GPS unplugged, or you will never get in to flash your firmware. I was tearing my hair out for a couple hours the other day trying to figure this out. And I finally saw some mention on one of the forums talking about how maybe the, you know, peripheral items like cameras and GPS could affect that. So that is about it on my little walkthrough here. I don't know how useful it was to anyone, but yeah, I'm still kind of learning this myself, but I'm just hoping to pass on to anybody that, you know, the little things I've picked up that, you know, especially on this quad, because it seems like it's fairly new and there isn't a whole lot of information out there about it. If there's any other questions anybody has, feel free to ask if anybody actually is watching this. And yeah, I'll be probably posting some updates along the way too, if anything else I learn about it. And also I'll try and give an update on that video transmitter, whether or not if I get that sorted out with actually getting the correct one from them, or I don't know how they're going to handle that, but still waiting to hear back on that. So that's about it. Overall, I'm pretty happy with this little quad. It's it's a little heavier and everything than the CineApe 25 that I've actually lent out here recently, but I like it. It still has plenty of power. It's, you know, it gets around, seems to handle pretty good. It's, I mean, for once again, not a real experienced pilot, but it seems to get the job done. So I'm looking forward to when the weather gets a little nicer and having a GoPro on it and having some little adventures with it. Well, that's about it. Thanks, guys.